The massive alien ship appeared near Earth's orbital station without warning. It was 3 times bigger than anything humans had ever built in space. The hull was smooth and silver, covered in patterns that seemed to move like water. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of the Earth Defense Station Liberty and watched the alien vessel drift closer. His coffee had gone cold in his hand. Jake was a former Navy pilot who had spent 15 years flying fighters before taking command of the station. He had short brown hair that was starting to gray at the temples and a scar above his left eyebrow from an old training accident. The diplomats had chosen him to lead this meeting because they thought his military background would impress the aliens. What they didn't know was that Jake had brought his entire crew to the meeting, including people who probably should have stayed in the engine room. The alien delegation arrived in a smaller ship that docked with the station 2 hours later. Ambassador Zixthar walked through the airlock first. He was tall and thin, with blue skin that sparkled under the lights. His eyes were large and golden, and he wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. Behind him came 6 other aliens from different species, all looking important and serious. Jake met them in the main conference room. He had his senior officers with him. There was Commander Susan Martinez, his second-in-command, who kept everything running smoothly. Lieutenant Ben Taylor handled communications. And there was Danny Cooper, the chief engineer, sitting in the back row with a can of beer he had somehow smuggled into the formal meeting. Zixthar began speaking, and a small device on his chest translated his words into English. His voice was smooth and calm, like a teacher explaining something simple to children. "We are the Galactic Coalition," he said. "For 300 years we have brought peace and order to 73 species across the galaxy. We invite humanity to join us and take your place among the civilized worlds." Jake nodded politely. "We appreciate the invitation. What would joining involve?" Zixthar smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too perfect. "It is simple. You would need to reduce your military forces by 70%. You would follow galactic law instead of your own. And you would have a probationary period of 50 years before gaining full rights in the coalition." The room was quiet. Jake looked at the terms displayed on the screen. 50 years was a long time. Giving up most of their military seemed dangerous. Following alien laws that they had no part in writing seemed like a bad idea. "What happens if we say no?" Jake asked. The translator made a small buzzing sound, as if it was confused by the question. Zixthar's golden eyes widened slightly. "No species has ever refused coalition membership," he said slowly. "But if you did, Earth would be quarantined. You would have no access to galactic trade or technology, and you would have no protection." "Protection from what?" Jake asked. Zixthar's smile faded. "From species like the Krell Dominion. They are warriors who do not respect unaligned worlds. They take what they want from planets that have no coalition protection." Jake was about to respond when Danny Cooper stood up in the back of the room. Danny was 32 years old, tall and skinny, with red hair that stuck up in every direction. He had grease stains on his uniform jacket that he never seemed to notice. He was brilliant with engines and terrible at following rules. Danny walked down the aisle between the chairs and stopped next to Jake. He was carrying his beer can and had a look on his face that Jake recognized. It was the look Danny got right before he did something that would either save everyone or get them all killed. "Hey, Cap," Danny said. "Hold my beer. I got an idea." He handed the beer can to Jake, who took it automatically. The translator on Zixthar's chest made several confused noises trying to process the phrase. The literal meaning of the words made no sense in this situation. Danny pulled out a small tablet and started showing holographic images in the air above the conference table. They were technical diagrams of Earth's fusion drives, the engines that powered their ships. "See, the thing is," Danny said, talking fast like he always did when he was excited, "we've been using fusion drives for basic propulsion. But if you modify the magnetic containment fields and redirect the plasma exhaust through a focused aperture, you basically create a directed energy weapon that's way more powerful than anything you'd get from a conventional design." Zixthar stared at the diagrams. His golden eyes moved rapidly across the technical specifications. The other aliens in his delegation were leaning forward, their expressions changing from diplomatic politeness to something like alarm. "This is not possible," Zixthar said. The energy requirements would cause a cascade failure in the containment system. The ship would be destroyed. Danny shrugged. Yeah, if you use conventional containment. But if you pulse the fields in alternating frequencies and vent the excess heat through secondary systems, you can sustain it for about 45 seconds before things get dangerous. That's enough time to do a lot of damage. Things get dangerous? One of the other aliens asked, speaking for the first time. You mean this would destroy your ship? Only if you run it too long, Danny said cheerfully. Or if you mess up the frequency calculations. Or if the heat vents clog. But it would totally work for about 40 seconds. Jake tried to stop him. Danny, maybe we should not... But Danny was already showing them more diagrams. He explained how they could use gravity wells to slingshot ships at faster speeds than their engines should allow. He described a way to overload reactor cores to create massive explosions. He talked about using cargo containers as improvised missiles. The aliens watched in growing horror. Zixthar's blue skin had turned a lighter shade, almost white. He was making small gestures with his hands, and Jake realized the ambassador was signaling his ship. You would risk destroying your own vessels? Zixthar asked quietly. You would put your crews in danger with untested weapons? Danny looked confused by the question. I mean, yeah. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, you learned something for next time. Next time? Zixthar repeated. If the ship is destroyed, there is no next time. Not for that ship, Danny agreed, but the next crew would know what not to do. The silence in the room was heavy. Jake watched the aliens look at each other, having conversations with small movements and gestures that humans couldn't read. Finally, Zixthar stood up. We will need to discuss this with the Coalition Council, he said. His voice was carefully controlled, but Jake could hear something new in it. It might have been fear. We will contact you again soon with our response to your presentation. 3 weeks after the meeting with the Coalition, humanity's mining colony on Titan was having a quiet day. The colony housed about 200 people who worked extracting valuable minerals from Saturn's largest moon. Most of them were regular folks who had signed up for good pay and a chance to see space. They lived in connected habitat domes and spent their days operating mining equipment. The patrol ship Defiant orbited above them. It was small compared to warships, designed for checking cargo manifests and making sure drunk miners didn't try to fly home early. Lieutenant Amy Chen commanded the ship with a crew of 23. Amy was 30 years old, with black hair she kept in a tight bun and a reputation for following rules. She had joined the Space Force because she liked order and procedure. Her crew was a mix of experienced officers and young recruits who were still learning how space combat worked. When the Krell Dominion fleet appeared at the edge of Saturn's orbit, Amy was drinking coffee and reading reports. The sensors started screaming warnings, and she spilled her drink across her desk. Report, she said, running to the bridge. Ensign Pete Sullivan was at the weapons station, his face pale. 12 contacts, ma'am. Big ones. They just dropped out of faster-than-light speed, and they're heading straight for us. Amy looked at the tactical display. 12 warships. Each one was 5 times the size of the Defiant. They were Krell vessels, covered in weapons and armor. The Krell were the species Zixthar had warned them about. They were warriors who took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who got in their way. Send a distress signal to Earth, Amy ordered. Full emergency protocols. Then calculate how long until they reach us. The communications officer worked fast. Signal sent. Earth response time is 6 hours minimum. Enemy fleet will reach Titan in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Amy's orders were clear. When facing overwhelming force, evacuate civilians and retreat. Save as many lives as possible. Don't be a hero. She looked at her crew. Pete was already running calculations on his weapons console, even though he should have been preparing the evacuation. Lisa Martinez, the chief engineer, was watching the enemy ships with a strange expression on her face. Lisa was 45 years old, short and round, with gray hair and kind eyes. She was also known for creative solutions to impossible problems. Her file mentioned an incident where she had bypassed 17 safety systems to save a damaged freighter. We should run, Amy said slowly. We can't fight 12 warships with one patrol boat. No, ma'am, Pete agreed. We definitely can't. There was something in his voice, though. Amy knew that tone. It was the sound of someone who had an idea but wasn't sure if they should share it. But? Amy asked. Pete looked up from his console. The mining colony has 40 tons of industrial explosives in Storage Bay 3, the same chemical compounds the Krell use in their missiles, and we have 6 cargo haulers in the dock with magnetic grapples strong enough to move asteroids. Lisa was nodding. The cargo haulers have more engine power than our weapons systems. A lot more. And their grapples could hold the mining charges secure. Amy understood what they were suggesting. Take civilian cargo ships, load them with mining explosives, and use them as improvised weapons. It was insane. It violated probably a dozen regulations. If it went wrong, they could blow up the colony themselves. She grabbed her coffee mug and handed it to the communications officer. Hold this. Lisa, I need those cargo haulers armed and ready in 30 minutes. Pete, start calculating trajectories. The crew moved fast. Down on Titan, the miners loaded industrial explosives onto cargo haulers while the colony director screamed at them over the radio. The haulers were not designed to carry that much volatile material. The magnetic grapples were not rated for holding bomb loads. Everything about this plan was dangerous. 28 minutes later, 6 cargo haulers launched from Titan carrying enough explosives to level a small mountain. Amy programmed them to look like escape pods on basic sensors. She hoped the Krell would think the colonists were running away. War leader Krell Nash watched from his flagship as the small human colony launched what appeared to be evacuation craft. He was amused. The humans were running, just like every other weak species he had encountered. He ordered his fleet to shoot down the escape pods. It would send a message about what happened to those who defied the Krell. The Krell ships fired their weapons. The cargo haulers exploded in massive fireballs. The blasts were not impressive by military standards, but they created huge clouds of debris. Metal fragments and magnetic ore spread out in all directions, moving at thousands of miles per hour. Krellnash barely noticed. He was too focused on hunting down the human patrol ship to worry about some debris. He ordered his fleet to pursue the Defiant. That was his first mistake. The Krell ships flew directly into the debris fields. Chunks of metal moving at orbital velocity tore through their shields. The magnetic ore disrupted their sensors. 2 ships lost power completely. 3 more took serious damage to their weapon systems and engines. Krellnash roared in anger. The humans had tricked him. These were not escape pods, they were weapons. Primitive, crude, ridiculous weapons, but effective. He ordered a full assault on the colony. He would destroy every human here and make an example of this place. But when his damaged fleet reached Titan, they found more surprises waiting. The colony's industrial fabricators, huge machines designed to build mining equipment, had spent the last 40 minutes creating more improvised weapons. The Krell faced magnetic mines, makeshift railguns built from mining equipment, and even modified construction vehicles firing chunks of metal. It wasn't proper military equipment. It was civilian infrastructure turned into a battlefield nightmare. Every tool, every machine, every piece of equipment became a weapon. The colonists fought with welding torches and mining lasers. They used habitat airlocks as traps and oxygen tanks as explosive devices. The Krell had trained for war against organized military forces. They had no idea how to fight an entire colony that had turned itself into one big improvised bomb. 2 more Krell ships were destroyed. 4 others took heavy damage. Krellnash finally ordered a retreat when a mining robot somehow managed to attach an explosive charge to his flagship's hull. When Earth's reinforcement fleet arrived 6 hours later, they found the Defiant still operational, the colony intact, and the Krell fleet running away as fast as their damaged ships could go. Admiral Patricia Hayes, commander of Earth's Space Forces, listened to Amy's report in silence. When Amy finished explaining how they had won, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "You used cargo haulers as missiles," Patricia said. "Yes, ma'am." "Loaded with mining explosives." "Yes, ma'am." "And you turned a civilian mining colony into a weapons platform." "Yes, ma'am. I know I violated regulations." Patricia held up her hand. "You held off 12 warships with 1 patrol boat and a bunch of miners. I'm not going to court-martial you. I'm going to give you a medal and promote you. But first, I need to forward this footage to intelligence. They're going to want to study your tactics. Amy felt relieved. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, Patricia said. The Krell filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Coalition. They say we used illegal weapons and violated the rules of war. We didn't have illegal weapons, Amy protested. We had mining equipment and cargo ships. I know, Patricia said. That's what scares them. They can defend against weapons, but they don't know how to defend against a species that treats everything as a potential weapon. The footage of the battle spread across Earth's military networks within hours. Then it leaked to civilian networks. Within days, every human with access to the internet had seen how a small crew had defeated a superior enemy force using nothing but improvised weapons and crazy ideas. The video became famous. Someone added music to it. Someone else made it into a comment. The Galactic Coalition Council gathered in their chamber on the capital world. The room was huge, with seats arranged in a circle so every species could see each other. Representatives from 73 worlds sat in worried silence as they watched footage from the Battle of Titan play again on the central display. Council leader Thankor stood at the center. He was from the Vorthan Empire, the oldest and most respected species in the coalition. His people had been exploring space for over 2,000 years. They had seen many things, but humans confused them in ways they had never experienced before. We need to understand these humans, Thankor said. Two incidents are not coincidence. Their engineer casually described weapons that should be impossible. Their patrol crew defeated a superior force using improvised tactics. This suggests a pattern of behavior. Cultural analyst Mirasol stepped forward. She was a Pelthian, a species known for careful research and academic excellence. She had volunteered to study Earth's information networks to understand human culture. She had spent 3 days reviewing what humans called the Internet. What she found had kept her awake at night. I have completed my preliminary research, Mirasol began. Her voice was shaking slightly. I believe I have identified the core of human behavior. It centers on a phrase they use, hold my beer. The council chamber was silent. Translators worked to process the idiom, but the literal meaning made no sense. Please explain, Thankor said. Mirasol activated her display. Images appeared showing humans doing things that made the council members gasp. A human jumping off a cliff with fabric wings. Another human skiing down a mountain while being pulled by a flying machine. A human riding a bicycle off a ramp over a canyon. Hold my beer is not just a phrase, Mirasol explained. It is a fundamental expression of human psychology. When a human says this, they are about to attempt something dangerous, often with no clear safety plan. The phrase appears in millions of videos across their information networks. She showed more footage. Humans building makeshift rockets. Humans jumping from aircraft with only parachutes. Humans racing vehicles at deadly speeds. Humans climbing mountains without safety equipment. Surely this is a small subset of their population, another council member said. Aberrant individuals. Mirasol shook her head. No. This behavior is culturally celebrated. They have entire categories of entertainment called extreme sports. These are activities with significant mortality rates that humans engage in purely for fun. They document these activities and share them widely. Humans who survive particularly reckless acts gain social status. She pulled up a video of a human named Kyle Brady. He was skiing down a mountain at high speed while being pulled by a flying drone. He launched off a natural ramp and flew over a ravine that was at least 50 feet wide. He landed on the other side, crashed into snow, and got up laughing. The council watched in horrified silence. This Kyle Brady, Thankor asked carefully. What is his profession? Military special forces? Professional athlete? Mirasol checked her notes. He is a dental hygienist. He cleans teeth for a living. He did this activity on his day off for entertainment. The council chamber erupted. Representatives were talking over each other in dozens of languages. The translators struggled to keep up. Words like insane and death wish appeared repeatedly in the translations. Thankor called for order. Please continue your report. Mirasol showed more data. Human history was full of people attempting impossible things. They had gone to their moon using primitive computers. They had built machines to fly before they fully understood the physics involved. They had survived deadly diseases by deliberately infecting themselves with weakened versions. They have a saying, Mirasol said. What could go wrong? They say this before attempting dangerous activities, but here's what troubles me most. They seem to already know what could go wrong. They simply do not care. She showed footage from something called the X Games, where humans competed to perform the most dangerous stunts. Then footage from human military training, where they practiced in conditions that would kill most species. Then civilian videos of humans building homemade aircraft, explosives, and weapons just to see if they could. Every human we have observed shares this trait to some degree, Mirasol concluded. They view limitations as challenges, danger as motivation, failure as education. They do not have safety as a primary concern. They have achievement as a primary concern, and they accept risk as necessary. The council sat in stunned silence. This was not how intelligent species were supposed to behave. Evolution should have eliminated such reckless traits. Civilizations developed through careful planning and risk avoidance. But humans had done the opposite. They had survived by being willing to try anything. Back on Earth, Captain Jake Morrison was dealing with the new attention humanity was receiving. After the Battle of Titan, more coalition species wanted to establish contact, but they all approached Earth like humans were dangerous animals that might bite. Trade negotiations were complicated. The aliens were terrified of what humans might do with their technology. One species offered to sell Earth advanced medical equipment, then withdrew the offer when they realized humans might use it to experiment on themselves. Jake found the whole situation frustrating. Humans were not crazy. They were just practical. If something needed doing and the standard method did not work, you tried something else. That was common sense. Admiral Patricia Hayes called Jake to her office on the military headquarters station. She was a 50-year-old woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had commanded space forces for a decade. She had a message on her screen that she turned toward Jake. The Coalition has invited us to participate in the Galactic Games, Patricia said. It's a sporting event they hold every 10 years. All member species send teams. Jake read the invitation. We're not members yet. They want to see what we can do in controlled conditions, Patricia explained. It's a test. If we're too aggressive, they'll push for quarantine. If we're too weak, species like the Krell will see us as easy targets. We need to show we're capable but not insane. So we need to be the right amount of crazy, Jake said. Patricia smiled without humor. Exactly. I'm putting you in charge of selecting our team. Pick people who can win without terrifying everyone. Jake knew immediately that this was going to be impossible. Any human capable enough to win would naturally terrify aliens who thought safety was important. He spent a week reviewing personnel files. He needed athletes who were skilled, but also understood how to work with other species. He needed people who could follow rules while still being effective. Finally, he gave up on that approach. Instead, he picked people who were really good at what they did and hoped for the best. Greg Murphy had been an Olympic gymnast before becoming a construction worker in space. Casey Williams was a xenobiologist who had survived multiple encounters with deadly alien wildlife. Andy Foster was an engineer who designed space habitats. When Jake told them about the assignment, they all had the same reaction. They grinned and asked when they were leaving. Jake sent his selections to Admiral Patricia. She looked at the names and sighed. Greg Murphy once did a gymnastics routine on a construction beam, 300 feet above the ground with no safety harness, she said. I know, Jake replied. Casey Williams wrestled an alien predator to save her research team. I know. Andy Foster built a space station module that technically violated 6 building codes but worked better than the approved design. I know. Patricia looked at Jake for a long moment. You're not trying to win gracefully, are you? You're trying to make a statement. I'm trying to show them who we are, Jake said. If they can't handle that, better they know now. Patricia approved the team. Deep down, she knew Jake was right. Humanity could not pretend to be something they were not. Either the galaxy would accept them as they were, or there would be problems no matter what they did. The team left for Olympus Station 3 weeks later. They brought minimal equipment, a cooler full of beer, and a music playlist that was mostly rock songs about rebellion and not giving up. Olympus Station was the largest artificial structure in Coalition space. It orbited a neutral star system and served as a gathering place for diplomatic events. For the Galactic Games, over 1 million spectators had come from across known space to watch their species compete. The opening ceremony was formal and dignified. Each species entered the arena in carefully organized formations, wearing traditional ceremonial outfits. The Vorthons wore flowing robes of silver and gold. The Pelthians had complex geometric patterns on their clothing. Every species looked professional and prepared. Then the human team walked in. Greg Murphy led the way, wearing a simple blue jumpsuit with Earth's flag on the shoulder. He was 35 years old, tall and muscular, with blonde hair and an easy smile. Behind him came Casey Williams, a woman in her 40s with brown hair, in a ponytail and scars on her arms from various alien creatures. Andy Foster brought up the rear, carrying a backpack that probably contained tools he was not supposed to have. They waved at the crowd like they were at a casual sporting event instead of a formal diplomatic ceremony. Casey was drinking from a water bottle. Andy was checking something on his tablet and not paying attention to the procession. The alien spectators did not know what to make of them. These humans looked so ordinary. They did not have the bearing of elite athletes or military personnel. They looked like regular people who just happened to be here. Ambassador Zixthar sat in the VIP section with other coalition leaders. He watched the human team with growing concern. He had read the reports. He knew what humans were capable of, but seeing them in person, they looked so harmless. That worried him more than if they had looked dangerous. The first event was a zero-gravity obstacle course through a complex maze. It was designed to test spatial awareness, physical control, and problem-solving. The current record was held by the Vorthon team at 12 minutes. Most species finished in 15 to 20 minutes. Greg Murphy stood at the starting line, looking up at the maze. It was three-dimensional, full of twisting passages and obstacles that required careful navigation. The rules were simple. Get from start to finish as fast as possible. Touch all the checkpoint markers. Don't damage the course. Greg stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders. Then he turned to his teammates and said the phrase that was becoming humanity's unofficial motto. Hold my beer. He handed his water bottle to Casey and stepped up to the starting line. The timer began. Greg launched himself into the maze with confidence, moving through zero gravity like he had been born in space. But he was not following the marked path. Instead of carefully navigating through the passages, Greg used his momentum to bounce off walls. He pushed hard, turning himself into a projectile, and aimed for gaps that were technically part of the course but were never intended to be used as shortcuts. The course designers had built walls to create specific challenges. Greg used those same walls as launching points. He ricocheted through the maze like a pinball, hitting checkpoint markers at angles that should not have been possible. The crowd watched in shocked silence. The judges checked the rules repeatedly. What Greg was doing looked insane, but it was technically legal. The rules said to navigate the course and touch the checkpoints. They did not specify how. Greg finished in 7 minutes and 18 seconds. He had cut the record almost in half. When he drifted back to the starting area, slightly dizzy from all the bouncing, the judges were arguing amongst themselves. They reviewed the footage 3 times. They checked every rule in the book. Finally, they had to announce the time. Legal. Greg had won the event. The alien teams protested. This was not how the event was meant to be completed. It was dangerous. It was reckless. The head judge, a dignified Vorthon named Kelthar, made a ruling. The rules do not prohibit this approach. The human competitor completed the course legally. The time stands. The second event was a survival challenge on a hostile world simulation. Competitors had to navigate terrain, avoid dangerous creatures, and reach a rescue beacon. Most species approach this carefully, using stealth and planning. Casey Williams took a different approach. She walked directly toward the most dangerous area of the simulation, where a venomous alien creature was sleeping. Instead of avoiding it, she sat down nearby and started offering it pieces of her food rations. The judges watched in confusion through the monitoring cameras. What was she doing? The creature woke up, saw Casey, and prepared to attack. Then it smelled the food. Casey continued offering small pieces, making calming sounds. Slowly, carefully, she befriended a creature that was supposed to be one of the obstacles. Then she climbed onto its back and rode it through the wilderness to the rescue beacon. The judges had no category for this. The rules said to reach the beacon while avoiding or defending against threats. They did not say you could not make friends with the threats and use them as transportation. Casey finished the course in record time. When asked how she knew the creature would not attack her, she shrugged. I work with alien wildlife. You learn to read their behavior. That one was more curious than aggressive. I just needed to show I was not a threat. The alien teams were starting to understand something disturbing. Humans did not see rules as restrictions. They saw them as frameworks within which to operate creatively. If something was not specifically forbidden, it was allowed, and even if it seemed insane, they would try it anyway. The third event was an engineering challenge. Teams had to build a working vehicle from provided materials that could cross difficult terrain. They had 4 hours and a box of standard parts. Andy Foster looked at the parts for 5 minutes. Then he looked at the rules. Then he smiled. He built something that looked nothing like what the other teams were building. While they carefully assembled stable, safe vehicles, following the design principles they knew, Andy created something that barely held together. It was a collection of parts connected in ways that seemed random. The judges examined his vehicle with concern. It did not look safe. It did not look like it would work. This violates the spirit of the challenge, one judge said. Andy pulled out his tablet and showed them the rules. The rules say, build a working vehicle from these parts that can complete the course. They don't specify what kind of vehicle or what design principles to use. This meets all stated requirements. They tested it. Andy's vehicle fell apart twice during the test runs, but he rebuilt it quickly, making small adjustments. On the final run, it completed the course faster than any other design because it was so lightweight and had such unusual movement patterns that it avoided obstacles by accident as much as by design. The judges had another long argument. Technically, Andy's vehicle met all requirements. It worked. It completed the course. The fact that it looked like it should not work was not a violation of rules. By the 4th day of the games, the other species were starting to change how they approached events. They saw humans treating every challenge as a puzzle to be solved creatively, rather than a test to be passed according to established methods. Some alien competitors started trying riskier approaches. A Pelthian athlete attempted one of Greg's wall-bouncing shortcuts and broke his arm. The medical staff had to explain that just because humans could do something did not mean other species should try it. The final event was a team relay race through a hostile environment simulation. It combined extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, and structures that collapsed on timers. It was designed to test every aspect of a species' abilities while maintaining safety. The human team looked at the course, looked at each other, and started planning. Their conversation worried the judges who were monitoring them. Those structures collapse in patterns, Andy said, pointing at the holographic display. See? They fall every 90 seconds in sequence. If we time it right, we could use them as ramps. That's insane, Greg said. Then he grinned. Let's do it. Casey was studying the toxic atmosphere readings. The wind patterns create clear channels every few minutes. We can sprint during those windows and take shelter during the dangerous periods. They completed their plan in 20 minutes. It involved running through collapsing structures, using environmental hazards as advantages, and moving during times when the rules expected them to take shelter. When they ran the course, the crowd watched in horrified fascination. The humans were not surviving the hostile environment. They were using it. Collapsing structures became acceleration ramps. Toxic wind patterns became guidance systems. Extreme temperatures were timed obstacles rather than constant threats. They finished 12 minutes faster than should have been possible according to the course design parameters. The judges spent 2 hours reviewing the footage. Every safety expert in the stadium was arguing about whether what the humans did should be legal. It was dangerous. It was irresponsible. It completely ignored the intended design of the course. But it was legal. The humans had not broken a single rule. When the final scores were announced, humanity had won the Galactic Games. The alien spectators applauded politely, but there was an undercurrent of concern in the arena. Doi, Ambassador Zixthar, approached the human team afterward. They were celebrating with drinks and music, looking relaxed and happy. "Congratulations on your victory," Zixthar said formally. "Your performance was impressive." "Thanks," Greg said cheerfully. "That was fun. Good course design." "You did not follow the intended approaches to any event," Zixthar pointed out. 6 months passed after the Galactic Games. Humanity had proven they could compete with advanced species, but they still were not full members of the coalition. The diplomatic process moved slowly, with endless debates about whether humans could be trusted with access to galactic technology and knowledge. Then, everything changed in a single day. The Krell Dominion had been planning their revenge. War Emperor Krellvath was furious about the defeat at Titan and humiliated by humanity's success at the Games. He gathered the largest Krell fleet in history, 300 warships, each one a massive vessel of war covered in weapons and armor. It was enough firepower to conquer multiple star systems. But Krellvath did not attack Earth. He was smarter than that. Instead, he struck at the coalition's heart. The planet Pelthia was home to the Pelthian species, a peaceful people known for art, science, and philosophy. Their world was beautiful, covered in ancient cities full of libraries and museums. It was considered the cultural center of the coalition, a place where history and knowledge were preserved. It had minimal military defenses. The Krell fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed in Pelthian orbit without warning. They immediately began bombardment of the planet's shields. War Emperor Krellvath sent a message to the Coalition Council: "Surrender to Krell rule or watch Pelthia burn." The Coalition military scrambled to respond. They had 10,000 ships total, far more than the Krell. But most of those ships were scattered across Coalition space. The nearest battle group was 6 hours away. By the time they arrived in force, Pelthia's shields would fail, and the planet would be defenseless. Ambassador Zixthar sat in the Coalition Command Center, watching the tactical displays with growing despair. They needed help now. They needed someone who could reach Pelthia quickly and buy time for the main fleet to arrive. Earth was only 3 hours away by faster-than-light travel. Zixthar made the call he never thought he would make. He contacted Captain Jake Morrison directly. "Captain Morrison," Zixthar said, his voice tight with stress. "The Krell are attacking Pelthia. We need help, but I must be honest with you. We cannot officially ask for your assistance because Earth is not yet a coalition member, and we cannot promise anything in return." Jake was quiet for a moment. Through the video link, Zixthar could see him looking at tactical displays showing the situation at Pelthia. "You're asking us to risk our lives for people who wanted to put us on probation," Jake said slowly. "I am asking you to consider that some things matter more than politics," Zixthar replied. "The Pelthians have done nothing to harm anyone. They are scholars and artists. They will be slaughtered." Jake was silent for another long moment. Then he said, "Stand by." Jake immediately called Admiral Patricia Hayes. She answered from the Earth Defense Headquarters, already watching the same tactical feeds. "We're going," Jake said simply. "I know," Patricia replied. "I'm mobilizing the fleet now. How many ships do you think we need?" Jake looked at the numbers. The coalition fleet was 10,000 ships. The Krell had 300 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Earth's entire space fleet was 50 vessels, most of them converted civilian ships with improvised weapons. "All of them," Jake said. Patricia nodded. "I thought so. We can be ready to launch in 2 hours." "Make it 90 minutes, Jake said. "Every second counts." Across Earth and its orbital facilities, alarms sounded. Every ship capable of space combat was called to action. Military vessels, converted freighters, even a few civilian ships whose captains volunteered. Crews scrambled to their stations. Weapons were loaded. Reactors were powered up. 87 minutes later, 50 human ships jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading for Pelthia. They arrived in the middle of the Krell fleet's bombardment. Pelthia's planetary shields were failing. The beautiful cities below were visible through gaps in the energy barriers. The human fleet did not announce themselves. They did not coordinate with coalition forces. They simply dropped out of faster-than-light speed in the middle of the Krell formation and started shooting. War Emperor Krellvath was shocked. What were humans doing here? Earth had no obligation to help the coalition. This was not their fight. But humans apparently did not care about obligations. They cared about stopping bullies who attacked peaceful worlds. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations. Humans fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They used tactics that made no sense according to established military doctrine. Captain Linda Shaw commanded a converted cargo freighter called the Lucky Strike. When Krell weapons damaged her engines beyond repair, she did not retreat. Instead, she evacuated her crew into escape pods, set the ship's reactor to overload, and remotely piloted the Lucky Strike directly into a Krell command carrier. The explosion destroyed the carrier and damaged 2 nearby ships. Commander Ryan Mitchell led a squadron of fighters in a maneuver that should have been impossible. He used the gravity of Pelthia's moon to slingshot his ships around at velocities that should have torn them apart. The fighters emerged from behind the moon moving faster than the Krell sensors could track and tore through their formation. 3 Krell ships were destroyed before they even knew what hit them. On the surface of Pelthia, Krell troops had landed in several cities. They expected easy victories against a species with no military tradition. Instead, they encountered Marine Captain Nicole Stevens, who had landed with 200 troops to organize the defense. Nicole taught the Pelthians something they had never learned before. Sometimes survival meant breaking rules. Sometimes staying alive required doing things that were not civilized or polite. The Pelthian civilians, scholars who had never held weapons before, learned to fight using whatever they had available. Museum artifacts became clubs. Scientific equipment became improvised explosives. The Krell found themselves fighting an entire population that had decided not to die quietly. In space, the battle continued. Human ships were being destroyed. The Krell had superior weapons and armor. They should have been winning. But humans kept finding ways to even the odds. A damaged destroyer used its last functional weapon to shoot a hole in a Krell ship, then rammed through that hole to destroy it from the inside. A supply ship dumped its entire cargo of fuel into space and ignited it, creating a massive explosion that caught 3 Krell vessels. Sergeant Ben Cooper led a boarding team onto the Krell flagship. His team of 20 Marines fought through corridors full of enemy soldiers. When they reached the command deck, Ben walked up to War Emperor Krellvath and punched him in the face. The Krell crew watched in shock as their emperor fell. Ben looked at them and said in broken Krell language, "We are humans. We do not stop. We do not surrender. Leave now or die here." The Krell crew, seeing their emperor defeated and watching humans who seemed to feel no fear, abandoned their posts and ran. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Krell fleet was destroyed. Krellvath was dead, killed when his crew abandoned the ship and life support failed. The remaining Krell vessels that could still move retreated at maximum speed. Human losses were terrible. 37 of the 50 ships were destroyed or too damaged to repair. Over 4,000 humans died. It was the worst single battle loss in human space history. But Pelthia was saved. Ambassador Zixthar stood in the ruins of Pelthia's capital city 3 days after the battle. He watched human soldiers helping with rescue operations. A medic named Karen Price was working alongside Pelthian doctors, teaching them emergency techniques. An engineer named Chris Taylor was showing local workers how to repair damaged buildings using salvage technology. A young Pelthian child approached Zixthar. She was holding a human combat helmet that was too big for her head. "Is it true?" she asked. "The humans came to save us even though they didn't have to?" Zixthar looked at the helmet, still scarred from battle. "Yes, they came to help." "Why?" the child asked. Zixthar thought about everything he had learned about humans. The reckless engineer who described impossible weapons. The patrol crew who defeated overwhelming odds. The athletes who ignored safety to win. The soldiers who charged into impossible battles. "Because," he said slowly, Humans believe that some things are more important than safety or logic or following rules. They believe in protecting people who cannot protect themselves, even if it costs them everything. The child looked at the helmet with wonder. They're very brave. Yes, Zixthar agreed. They are also very crazy. But sometimes the galaxy needs people who are willing to be both. The Coalition Council met 1 week after the battle. There was no debate this time. No careful consideration of probationary periods or restricted rights. The vote to grant humanity full Coalition membership was unanimous. But they did something unprecedented. They created a new seat on the Coalition Security Committee specifically for Earth. Not because humans were the strongest or smartest species, but because sometimes the galaxy needed someone crazy enough to charge into impossible situations and determined enough to somehow win. Captain Jake Morrison attended the ceremony where Earth officially joined the Coalition. He wore his dress uniform, which still had scorch marks from helping with rescue operations on Pelthea. Ambassador Zixthar personally presented him with Earth's credentials. The chamber was full of representatives from every Coalition species. Many of them had tears in their eyes. "Welcome to the Galactic Coalition," Zixthar said formally. "We are honored to have humanity among us." Jake accepted the credentials. Then he said, "We have one condition." The chamber went silent. Conditions at this stage were unusual. 1 year after humanity joined the Galactic Coalition, the galaxy was a very different place. The changes started small but grew quickly as humans spread across Coalition space, bringing their unique approach to problem-solving with them. Captain Jake Morrison now served as Earth's representative on the Coalition Security Committee. He attended meetings in the grand chambers on the capital world, sitting alongside representatives from species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. At first, the meetings were awkward. The other representatives were not sure how to work with humans. That changed during the first major crisis Jake handled. A colony world named Tertus Prime was experiencing catastrophic failures in their water processing systems. The equipment was old Coalition technology, designed to last for centuries. But something had gone wrong. The systems were breaking down faster than they could be repaired. The colony would run out of clean water in 3 weeks. Coalition engineers studied the problem for 2 weeks. They determined that the systems needed to be completely rebuilt using modern technology. This would take 6 months and cost enormous amounts of resources. The colony would need to be evacuated. Jake listened to their report, then asked a simple question. "Can I send a team to look at it?" The Coalition engineers were offended. They had spent 2 weeks analyzing the problem. What could humans possibly see that they had missed? But Jake's reputation had grown since the Battle of Pelthea. The Security Committee agreed to let him try. Jake sent Andy Foster and a team of human engineers to Tertus Prime. They arrived with toolboxes and scanning equipment. They spent 6 hours examining the water processing systems while the Coalition engineers watched skeptically. Then Andy called Jake with his report. "The systems are fine," Andy said. "The problem is that someone installed them wrong 200 years ago. They've been running at 80% efficiency this whole time, and now they're wearing out because of the stress. We can fix it." "How long?" Jake asked. "Give us 3 days." The Coalition engineers protested. You could not fix centuries-old systems that were fundamentally flawed in 3 days. It was impossible. Andy and his team did it in 2 days. They bypassed the incorrect installations, rerouted key connections, and modified the systems to run more efficiently. The water processing equipment started working better than it had in its entire operational history. When asked how they figured it out so quickly, Andy shrugged. "We're used to working with equipment that's breaking down. You learn to see past the design and understand how things actually work versus how they're supposed to work." Word spread quickly through Coalition space. Humans could fix problems that other species thought were impossible. More importantly, they could do it fast and cheap using improvised methods. Soon, Jake was receiving requests from colonies across the galaxy. Equipment failures, engineering problems, mysterious malfunctions. Everyone wanted human engineers to take a look. Danny Cooper, who was now head of Earth's Spacecraft Design Bureau, became famous for creating ship designs that violated traditional engineering principles but worked better than conventional vessels. His ships were lighter, faster, and more efficient than anything the Coalition had seen before. When asked how he came up with his designs, Danny explained his philosophy. Most engineers design ships to be safe and reliable. That's good, but it makes them conservative. We design ships to be effective first, then we add safety features. It's a different approach. The Coalition's shipbuilding companies studied Danny's designs with fascination and horror. They broke so many established rules. They used materials in ways that should not work. They combined systems that were never meant to be integrated. But they worked brilliantly. On the military side, Lieutenant Amy Chen, now promoted to commander, was teaching Coalition military officers about human combat tactics. Her classes were always full because everyone wanted to understand how humans fought. The key, Amy explained to a room full of alien officers, is that we don't think of weapons and resources as separate categories. Everything is a potential weapon if you need it to be. Everything is a potential resource if you can figure out how to use it. A Vorthan officer raised his hand. But this requires accepting enormous risk. How do you train soldiers to be willing to risk death so casually? Amy shook her head. We don't risk death casually. We calculate the risk and decide if the goal is worth it. The difference is that humans are willing to accept higher risk levels if the goal is important enough. The classes led to changes in Coalition military doctrine. Not every species could adopt human tactics, but they learned to think more creatively about combat. They learned that rules and procedures were tools, not limitations. Meanwhile, human civilians were spreading across Coalition space, working on colonies and space stations. Everywhere they went, they brought their culture with them, including their entertainment. The human concept of extreme sports became hugely popular among young aliens who were tired of their species' conservative approaches to life. Skateboarding, rock climbing, and skydiving spread to dozens of worlds. Safety officials across the galaxy were overwhelmed trying to regulate activities they never imagined anyone would attempt for fun. Greg Murphy opened a training facility on Olympus Station where he taught zero-gravity athletics to anyone interested. His most popular class was called Learning to Fall Without Dying and focused on how to move safely through dangerous environments. It was packed with young aliens from species that had never emphasized physical risk-taking. Casey Williams became the Coalition's leading expert on dangerous alien wildlife. Her approach to xenobiology was controversial but effective. Instead of studying creatures from a safe distance, she interacted with them directly to understand their behavior. She had been bitten, stung, clawed, and poisoned dozens of times. She kept careful notes on all of it. Her research led to breakthrough discoveries because she was willing to get close enough to learn things other scientists missed. She also taught other xenobiologists that many creatures considered deadly were actually manageable if you understood them properly. Back on Earth, the changes were just as dramatic. Humanity now had access to Coalition technology and knowledge. Scientists were working with alien researchers. Artists were collaborating across species. Human children were learning galactic history alongside their own. But the biggest change was in how humanity saw itself. They were no longer alone in the universe. They were part of something larger, and they had proven that their crazy, reckless, creative approach to problem-solving was valuable. Admiral Patricia Hayes retired from military service and became Earth's ambassador to the Coalition Council. She was better at diplomacy than anyone expected, mostly because she was completely honest about human nature. Yes, we're going to keep doing things that scare you, she told the council during one memorable meeting. No, we can't promise we'll always ask permission first, but we can promise that when something needs doing and nobody else can figure out how, we'll find a way. The council accepted this because they had learned something important. Every species in the Coalition had strengths. The Vorthans were wise and patient. The Pelthians were creative and thoughtful. The Manthi were strong and disciplined. Humans were adaptable and fearless. They looked at impossible situations and saw opportunities. They treated limitations as challenges to overcome rather than absolute barriers. One evening, Jake was having dinner with Ambassador Zixthar in a restaurant on the capital world. They had become friends over the past year, despite their very different backgrounds. I have a question, Zixthar said. Something I have wondered about since we first met. Why are humans so willing to take risks? Most species evolve toward caution. Risk avoidance improves survival. Jake thought about it while finishing his drink. Maybe for most species, but humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us constantly. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate changes. We survived not by being careful, but by being clever and willing to try anything. And this made you reckless? Zixthar asked. It made us flexible, Jake corrected. We learned that the biggest risk is doing nothing. If something isn't working, you try something else. If the safe path leads nowhere, you take the dangerous path. We're not crazy. We're practical. Zixthar considered this. I think I finally understand what hold my beer really means. It is not about the beer. It is about the trust. When a human says this, they are asking someone to trust them while they attempt something difficult. They are saying, watch me prove this can be done. Jake smiled. That's pretty close. It's also about confidence. When we say hold my beer, we're committing to action. We're saying we believe we can succeed, even if we're not completely sure how. And if you fail, Zixthar asked. Then someone else tries something different, Jake said. Humans don't give up. We just change the approach. 6 months later, the Coalition faced a new crisis. A spatial anomaly appeared near a major trade route, pulling ships into what appeared to be an unstable wormhole. 3 Coalition science vessels had been lost trying to study it. The Council was debating whether to close the trade route permanently. Jake attended the emergency meeting where scientists presented their findings. The anomaly was unpredictable and extremely dangerous. It violated several laws of physics. Nobody knew how to close it or stabilize it. Danny Cooper was at the meeting as a technical consultant. He listened to all the presentations, studied the data, and then raised his hand. I have an idea, Danny said. The room went quiet. Everyone remembered what happened the last time Danny had an idea at a diplomatic meeting. We can't stabilize the anomaly, Danny continued, but we might be able to collapse it by overloading it with energy. If we detonate a reactor core at the right frequency inside the wormhole, the feedback could cause the whole thing to collapse. A Vorthan scientist responded immediately. That would require someone to pilot a ship directly into the anomaly. The time dilation effects would be extreme. The pilot would age decades in minutes. It would be a suicide mission. Danny nodded. Yeah, probably, but it would work. The council chamber erupted in discussion. They could not ask someone to sacrifice themselves like this. There had to be another way. Jake stood up and walked over to Danny. Without saying anything, he handed Danny his water glass. Danny took it with a grin. Thanks, Cap. You're not going alone, Jake said. I'm coming with you. No, Admiral Patricia Hayes said firmly, standing up from her seat. You're both too important. I'm retired anyway. I'll go. With respect, ma'am, Commander Amy Chen said, also standing. You're too old for high G maneuvers. I should go. Suddenly, dozens of humans in the chamber were standing up, volunteering. The alien representatives watched in shocked silence as humans argued over who would get to fly the suicide mission. Finally, Zixthar stood. Stop, please. This is not how we do things in the Coalition. We do not ask for volunteers for suicide missions. Jake turned to face him. Then how do you close the anomaly? Zixthar had no answer. The truth was that the Coalition did not have a solution because they would never ask someone to sacrifice themselves. Their culture did not work that way. But humans were different. Humans had a long history of people volunteering for dangerous missions. They had firefighters who ran into burning buildings, soldiers who jumped on grenades to save their friends, test pilots who flew experimental aircraft knowing they might not survive. In the end, Danny went with a volunteer crew of 10. They modified a ship's reactor to explode on command, calculated the precise frequency needed to collapse the anomaly, and flew directly into the wormhole. The time dilation effects were worse than predicted. The crew aged 40 years and 15 minutes. When they emerged after successfully collapsing the anomaly, they were elderly versions of themselves. But they were alive, and they had saved the trade route. The Coalition media could not stop talking about it. Humans had done it again. They had solved an impossible problem by being willing to do what nobody else would consider. That night, Jake found Danny in the hospital where the crew was recovering. Danny's red hair was white now, and he looked 70 years old instead of 33. But he was grinning. "We did it, Cap," Danny said. "The math worked out perfectly." "You sacrificed 40 years of your life," Jake said quietly. Danny shrugged. "Time's relative anyway. Besides, I got to test a theory nobody thought would work. That's worth it." Jake sat down next to the bed. "The council wants to give your crew medals, the highest honor they have." "That's nice," Danny said. "But can I ask you something? Back at the beginning, when I first explained my weapons idea to the aliens, and you told me to hold your beer, did you know I was going to terrify them?" Jake smiled. "I knew you were going to be yourself, and I knew that would change everything." "Good," Danny said, closing his eyes. "Because I'm not done coming up with ideas yet. Give me a few months to get used to being old, and I'll be back to work." Jake believed him. That was the thing about humans. They never stopped trying. They never stopped finding new ways to solve problems. They never stopped saying, "Hold my beer," and attempting the impossible. The galaxy had learned this truth over the past year. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the smartest or the most advanced. But when something needed doing that nobody else could figure out, when a problem seemed impossible to solve, when the situation was so dangerous that only a fool would try, the galaxy knew who to call. They called the species that looked at impossible odds and said, "Watch this." They called the species that treated safety regulations as suggestions. They called the species whose most famous phrase was, "Hold my beer." They called humanity. And humanity never said no. "If we're going to be part of the coalition," Jake continued, "we need you to understand something about human culture. We have certain phrases that are important to us. Hold my beer. Watch this. What could go wrong?" When humans say these things, it means we're about to do something that might be brilliant or might be stupid. Usually both. Zixthar processed this. "You want us to understand your cultural idioms." "I want you to understand what they mean," Jake said. "Because we're going to keep being who we are. We're going to keep finding creative solutions. We're going to keep taking risks that scare you. If you can't accept that, this partnership won't work." The Coalition Council looked at each other. They had just seen what humans could accomplish when they decided something was important. They had watched humans sacrifice themselves to save a species they barely knew. "We accept," Zixthar said, "but perhaps you could warn us before attempting your most dangerous plans." Jake smiled. "We'll try, but sometimes the best plans are the ones you come up with in the moment." The ceremony continued with formal speeches and celebrations. But the real moment had already happened. The galaxy had officially accepted that humans were going to change everything. Andy shrugged. The intended approaches were too slow. "We found better ways." "Better ways that put you at significant risk," Zixthar said. Casey smiled. "Risk is relative. We knew what we were doing." Zixthar realized something important. The humans were not being reckless by their standards. They had carefully calculated every action. They understood the dangers. They simply accepted levels of risk that other species would never consider. That evening, the Coalition Council held an emergency session. They added a new classification to their xenological database. Humans were now labeled as Category Sigma, unpredictable, potentially hazardous, approach with caution. It was the first time that category had ever been used for a species that was not actively hostile. But after watching humans compete in the games, the council agreed it was necessary. Somewhere in the arena, Greg Murphy was teaching a group of young Pelthian athletes how to do wall bounces in zero gravity. They were failing badly but laughing as they tried. The galaxy was starting to realize that humans were going to change everything. On Olympus Station, the coalition organizers watched the human team arrive and felt a sense of growing dread. The humans did not look like professional athletes. They looked like ordinary people who happened to be very good at specific things. More concerning, they looked confident. Not arrogant, just calmly certain that they would do well. That kind of confidence usually meant someone was either delusional or genuinely skilled. The coalition organizers really hoped it was delusion, but they had seen the footage from Titan. They had read the reports about human culture. They suspected they were about to witness something that would require them to rewrite the rules of the games. And they were absolutely right. Why routine? People started making jokes about it. How do you defeat 12 warships? Hold my beer and give me some mining charges. But in the Galactic Coalition headquarters, nobody was laughing. The military analysts watched the footage over and over. They saw humans treating safety regulations as suggestions. They saw civilians joining a military fight without hesitation. They saw improvised tactics that should not have worked but somehow did. The analysts wrote reports full of concerned language. Humans did not fight like any other species. They had no respect for established military doctrine. They seemed to think any available resource could be used as a weapon. Most concerning of all, this appeared to be normal for them. The crew of the Defiant had acted like their tactics were obvious common sense. The miners had joined the fight without any apparent fear. The Coalition Council called another emergency meeting. They needed to understand what kind of species humanity really was. Because if this was how ordinary humans behaved in a crisis, what would their actual military forces be capable of? The alien delegation left quickly. Through the window, Jake watched their ship undock and move away faster than necessary, like they were in a hurry to leave. Danny took his beer back from Jake and drank the rest of it. That went pretty well, I think. Jake looked at his engineer. Danny, you just terrified the most advanced civilization in the galaxy by explaining how we could turn our own ships into bombs. Danny grinned. Yeah, but did you see their faces? They're definitely going to remember us now. Jake couldn't argue with that. For better or worse, humanity had just made an impression on the galaxy. He had a feeling that things were about to get very interesting. In the distance, the alien ship jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Coalition was having an emergency meeting about the crazy humans who thought safety was optional.